Greetings. This is another class of CUET PG General Paper Preparations. The topic today we are going to cover is post-Mughal era and Indian national movement. So, the last class we discussed about the medieval and ancient history of India. So, in that class, it finished with the decline of Mughal Empire. So, what in this class we will just discuss about what happened after the Mughal era and what ethnic empires rise after that, and the Indian national movement. So, moving on to the topic. So, the post-Mughal era. So, basically, the Mughal Empire was most and most centralized authority. The power was centralized in the Delhi, and the ethnic groups like such as the Deccan, Marathas were felt suppressed. So after the decline of the Mughal Empire, so after the reign of the last great emperor, who is the Aurangzeb, after his downfall, after his death, the Mughal Empire gradually decreased and lost its control. Then there was a rise of powerful regional states among the Indian subcontinent, such as the Marathas, Sikh, and Mysore. So they were the prominent regional. So they reasserted the indigenous rule, empowering the local sovereignty, and which eventually led to the historical memory of self-governance. So the Marathas and the Sikhs and Mysore, they just want to establish a self-governance empire among them. So there was complete different empires. So these empires ultimately led to the notion of self-governance, which was later inspired in Indian national movements. Their effective administrative reforms and warfare tactics became symbols of indigenous capability and resilience. So not only overthrowing the Mughal dominance, they also very, very effective warfare tactics. They were warfare heavyweights and also on proper established administrative and economic reforms they made. In the wake of the Mughal decline, the regional power promoted native languages, arts, and literature, fostering distinct cultural identity as well. So, as we discussed in the previous class, the Mughal Empire was not regional based; they were more than centralized based, and they also have a notion. They also have identity of. They also have an identity of a Persian and Afghanistan heritage. But after the downfall of such empire, such a powerful empire, there were regional powers promoted the native languages as the indigenous identity. So the most important empire which raised after the Maratha Empire after the decline of the Mughal Empire was the Maratha Empire, which centered which began the 17th century and which ultimately challenged the authority of Mughals. It was established by the great Shivaji Maharaj, who was a great military strategist who was well known for his innovative military tactics. During his reign, the Maratha was so flexible and have a federative administrative and that enabled rapid territorial expansion. As seen in the map, which is given in the presentation, after the decline of Mughal Empire, the Marathas had a very rapid growth in their territorial expansions as well. So, as I said, they have a very well-versed military tactics, including the utilize guerrilla warfare tactics as well. So, what they want is the main idea of the Maratha was influenced by their cultural identity, as they name themselves. So, these are the important rulers. The screen resembles the important rulers of the Maratha Empire, starting from Shivaji Maharaj, Sambhaji, Rajaram, Tarabi. These four emperors were the most important ones. During their reign, the Maratha Empire played a most important and powerful role in Indian history. After them, after the Peshwa Bajirao, so there was a rapid decline of their authority over the Indian subcontinent. So mostly the Marathas have a strong military and they have made many military conquests in their reign as the emperors. So what was the causes of the decline of such a powerful empire? Is nothing but as every empire faces, they had a many success and disputes which they cannot overcome in the next times. So they have the succession person who became the emperor of the empire was not capable of ruling such a vast territory. And there was also a rapid expansion in their territories as well. So due to that, there was a military overreact. They cannot govern the territories properly, and eventually the system was weaker. So as I already mentioned, there was a division of powers between the Maratha empires as well. So as the as the succession disputes evolved, there was a fragmented power centers and regional rivalries as well. And due to the rapid expansion of their territories, there was an economic strain due to their non-calculated revenue systems. So these were the major causes of the decline of such a powerful empire. The next empire we are going to cover is the Mysore Kingdom, which was mostly concentrated on the Deccan Plateau and the southern part of the Indian Peninsula. Originated as a modest principality in the southern state that gradually rose to prominence through local trade and strategic vision. So the Mysore Kingdom was not a well-versed kingdom at first, but they rapidly grew up due to the failure of a strong center at the north. They rapidly grew to power, and after that, they rose to a prominent power in the southern India. Gradually developed established themselves as a kingdom due to the local trade and strategic vision. So in the 18th century, by the 18th century, they were a well-versed kingdom in the southern part of India, and they have a very well-known military and administrative reforms in that region. So they were well equipped in the military tactics, and they were the one to introduce rocket artillery in the warfare for the Indian Peninsula. So the empire was not long-lasting. The kingdom itself was not very long-lasting, but their influence still predominant in that region. So the two most important rulers of the kingdoms were Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan. And most of you might know they were well known for their resistance against the British imperial colonial rulers. Like the rulers after Tipu Sultan focused on restoring stability and refining administrative policies disrupted by the conflict. So after the time of Tipu Sultan, there was a succession conflict between the empires, between the successors. So there was many conflicts, and due to that, the empire eventually weakened and played a cause for the downfall too. But after the rule of Tipu Sultan, many leaders tried to reform that, but eventually they failed in the reformation process. Integrating traditional governance with modern military practices allowed Mysore to command respect and maintain influence in the challenging geopolitical environment. Actually, during the time of the Mysore Empire, there was a challenging geopolitical conflict in the Indian subcontinent, because the British colonial empire grew in par with the Mysore Empire. So British colonial empire was establishing the well-versed power in the north. So the Mysore Empire cannot stand a chance against the military power against the colonial British Empire. So eventually, the Mysore Empire too fell after a short period of influence in the region. So the main cause for their downfall is the prolonged conflicts within the British. So they had many conflicts, especially Tipu Sultan had many conflicts with the British. So which notably can be reflected in the Anglo-Mysore Wars, and that was the main reason for their downfall. And also the internal political discord was also played a crucial role. So during the conflict, the Mysore Empire, so what caused Indian national movement to evolve? So the main reason was the establishment of East India Company and the colonial British Empire through the East India Company. So as we well know. So the East India Company was established in the early 17th century, as we covered in the previous classes, under a royal charter which was signed by Queen Elizabeth I. East India Company was initially formed as a trade company in India, which was granted permission by the great Jahangir, one of the Mughal Empire. So they started their company in India as a joint stock company, which was completely based on trade. So the main items they traded were spices, textiles, indigo, and later they invested their economic interest in tea and opium as well. So later, due to their establishment, they established very well in the Indian subcontinent, especially in the Bengal and Middle East provinces of the Indian subcontinent. They adopted many charter acts, due to which, as profits grew, the need for the protect commercial interests led the company to gradually move beyond mere trade, setting the groundwork for political and military interventions in the Indian territories. So, as I said earlier, their business rapidly grew in India. So, due to the charter acts and various acts such as the regulating act of 1770, they created more administrative reforms than the trade which they first initiated, to create a groundwork for the protection of their trade, and due to which they established a very well military within the Indian territories. to protect, in the name of protecting their trade, establishing the trading factories and trading posts and factories. So the first factory the East India Company established was in Surat. So after that, they created many factories in the provinces such as Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta, which all are coastal regions of Indian subcontinent. These factories serve as secure bases for trading operations, providing facilities for storing goods, managing finances, and coordinating shipments back to England. So these factories, as I mentioned earlier, played a crucial role in trading products between India and England. Fortifications was made. So these key ports, in these key ports, there was many fortification to protect their trade against hostile forces and rivals, local rivals. Over time, the British East Indian Company was so stable and established. The company, through these factories, the company also established a network of correspondence and intelligence that allowed it to monitor local political developments and commercial opportunities. So, as I said earlier, the British East India Company very soon evolved as one of the most crucial factors in the Indian politics, political history. So what they did was they established many treaties within the kings. They made many treaties, signed many treaties within the king, which helped to evolve themselves as a trade monopoly and may play a major part in the local politics. So through that, they established themselves as an administrative interface. So after that, what they did, after becoming an important factor, they established themselves as a military superpower. The first battle the East India Company fought in India is the Battle of Plassey, which fought in the year 1757. Taken out of it, it was the Battle of Plassey, which happened in the year 1757 against a ruler such known as Sirajuddin Dowla. He was the Nawab of Bengal. The first Battle of Plassey, which was fought between the East India Company and the Nawab of Bengal, in which Nawab of Bengal ultimately lost, which established the first military engagement of the East India Company in the Indian subcontinent. So there were also many military campaigns which was organized by the East India Company in the name of protecting their trade interests within India. So later they fought many important battles in India, such as the Battle of Buxar, through which the East India Company took control of many territories and defeated many Indian rulers as well. They established themselves as a legitimate authority within the eyes of the local and European powers. So gradually they are increasing themselves, establishing themselves from a trade forum to an administrative superpower, military superpower in India. The company's military engagements were supported by senior logistics disciplined troops, which the soldiers of Indian empires was ultimately failed. So they have a very disciplined troops and very scientifically advanced troops, which the Indian failed. So the battles were not that much challenging to the British authorities. So after that, due to these gradual military engagements, the company established themselves as a colonial administration from a commercial enterprise, which they were first registered. So the main source of income for this colonial administration was obviously collecting the taxes. So what they did was they established a system known as Zamindari system. It was nothing but a local body, individual self-governance. Zamindars were appointed at the local level to collect the taxes within some part of region of the particular area and to pay the taxes to the company, through which they had a very well system to collect the revenues and establishing themselves more powerful. So the gradual assumption of civil authority was marked by the appointment of company officials as governors. So what they did after this gradual assumption of a colonial administration, they appointed many officials such as governors, district collectors, as well as military commanders in India, through which they are a very well parted or maybe we can term as well organized administrative system through these processes. As we see in the previous classes, we talked about the powers of the Governor General and Viceroy, right? They were the byproducts of these appointments of the company officials. So as I spoke earlier, they also adopted many acts such as the Charter Acts, which obviously changing the commercial enterprise into a colonial administration. This evolution laid the foundation for the modern colonial states in India. So after they became a military superpower system in India, so there was an important revolt in India which happened because of the resilience against British East Indian Company. The Indians who worked under the British governance felt they were not prioritized or they were being suppressed by the colonial British administrative officers. So eventually, a revolt broke in the year 1857, which were ultimately known as the Sepoy Mutiny. So, what was the causes for the Sepoy Mutiny? So, first one was the economic exploitations. So, the Indian natives felt that their resources have been exploited by the East India Company's upcoming policies, such as which can be reflected through the taxation matters, taxation concerns, taxations, which were considered to be exploitation on the kings, zamindars, and well as the local peasants and artisans as well. So also there was a political discontent because the English officers can be termed as an invaders in the Indian indigenous regions. So there was a political discontent between the Indian kings and the British officials as well. So there was also a socio-religious interference as well, because British tried to reform Indian social practices, Indian social customs, which were not accepted by the conservative Indians as well. And there are many other factors such as military grievance and political discontent, which eventually led to a revolt in the year 1857. So what actually happened in the revolt was triggered by the cartridge controversy when the sepoys at Meerut. So what was the actual conflict, which was the spark for such a revolt, is nothing but there was a rumor which was spreading at the time in the year 1857, especially at the Meerut, that the Enfield rifle cartridges, the grease used for the cartridges, such cartridges consist of the fat of cows and pigs to make it usable. So it was a mere rumor which was believed by soldiers of the Meerut. So they immediately they started to rebel against it. So after conquering Meerut, the revolt extended to the northern parts of India, which created a chain reactions among the soldiers of the British administration as well. The uprising, as I mentioned earlier, quickly spread from Meerut to Delhi, Kanpur, and Lucknow, Jhansi, which was the important forts of the British East India Company in northern India. In Delhi, the rebels declared Bahadur Shah II. The Bahadur Shah II was the last Mughal emperor as a symbolic leader, reviving sense of national unity against the old British imperial banner. So what happened was there was as I mentioned earlier, there was a mutiny exploded and spread throughout the course of the important ports of northern India, such as Delhi, Jhansi, Kanpur. And what the rebels did was they established the Bahadur Shah II as a now, Bahadur Shah II was the last emperor, the last descendant, last known emperor of the Mughal empire. So the rebels declared Bahadur Shah II as their symbolic leader. So what they did was they tried to conquer the forts of the British East India Company one by one. The uprising was not limited to army alone. It was not an uprising only on the military basis, but rather than the civilians such as the workforce and also the merchants, traders also joined the revolt and protested against the British authority. But despite this resilience, the revolt ultimately failed due to various reasons, which we will examine here. So, what are the causes for such a revolt to fail? So, there was a lack of nationwide coordination. As I said earlier, the revolt spread across North India, but not across Indian subcontinent. The North Indian forts were conquered, but the South India remained silent as there was not nationwide coordination between the leaders of the Indian subcontinent. And there was not a unified ideology between the rebels, as overthrowing overthrowing the British authority was the ultimate aim, ultimate goal. But there was not a unified ideology. Many of them supported Bahadur Shah. Many of the Muslims backed the Bahadur Shah, while some of the Hindus also backed the descendants of the Peshwa rulers, Maratha rulers. So there was a lack of unity between the rebels, and there was a lack of nationalized ideology between the rebels. So which led to which was the main one of the main factors in the downfall as well. So there were poor organization, and the British had a well-versed scientific army equipments with the Indians lagged, and the key elites limited participation also paved way for the downfall. So after such a nationwide rebel was followed, so there was a very great economic and administrative reforms which was conducted by the British government, through which many of important results were announced that we can see here. There was a transfer of power between the English East India Company. The power to the Sepoy Mutiny ended the East India Company's power in India. So the power of the East India Company was transferred to the British Crown, and through which the British Crown rule was started in India after so there were many military restructuring process. So through which the Indians were given some more preference in the recruitment of the military system. So there were also long-term economic adjustments and the taxation was reduced on the peasants. So these administrative and economic reforms were adopted to dilute the pro-effectiveness of the rebel. So after which the Indian national movement also started in the 1885. There were three important phases of Indian national movement which are the moderate phase of 1885 to 1905. So the moderate phase started from the formation of Indian National Congress to the year 1905. So what happened in the 1905 was the 1905. We can see one of the most crucial and most important movements in Indian national history, which was the partition of Bengal, through which there was a rebellious phase. The extremist or the radical phase was evolved, through which in the year 1905 they was assumed to be the start of the extremist phase, or we can term it as a radical phase, and it was in practice till the year 1915. So what happened after 1915 was then in the 1915 the Gandhi, the also known as the crucial father figure of Indian national movement, come into the play. So after in the year 1947, it can be observed as the Gandhian phase. So coming back to the topic of a moderate phase of Indian national movement. So as I mentioned earlier, it started in the year 1885. So what happened in the year 1885 was the formation of Indian National Congress in the year 1885. Due to the backdrop of Indian awareness of the colonial exploitation. So the previous rebels and previous revolts, through that we can understand that there was a growing awareness between the Indians among the Indian workers or peasants. There was an exploitation by the colonial officers. So Indian National Congress was first established as a formal platform for the Indians to establish a grievance, to establish a voice on their grievance and advocate for reforms within the British system. So the main figure on establishing such a platform known as Indian National Congress were A.O. Hume, Allen Octavian Hume, Dadabhai Naroji, and Feroza Mehta. They were the crucial important leaders establishing in the Indian National Congress. There was another leader, her name was Annie Besant. She was official as well. So they were the most important rulers in setting up Indian National Congress. The initial agenda of to create such a platform is to share the administrative responsibilities within Indians. So the main notion, the main propaganda against the British were that they were not the main agenda against the British was they were not similar to, they were considered as foreigners, and they were not considered as a similar figure among the Indians. So what strategy the Indian National Congress observed was that they want to create a balanced focus between the Indians and the British official, and want to share the administrative reforms responsibilities between Indians and British as well. The INC, Indian National Congress, provides an institutional forum where the Indian elites who debate the public policies in a more organized platform. So they want to dilute the revolutionary phase. So what they did was, so they want to create a debate on the problematic public policies or petitions, reforms which are conducted by this colonial government. So they want to create a platform where they can debate on the controversial issue. And what they did, they want to write more democratic way. They want to write something in a petition, submit to the British official, and want to challenge the problems of the British rule in a more and more way where there will be a less bloodshed. So early sessions of Indian National Congress was a mere call for negotiation within the British authorities. So the ideological foundation and constitutional method. So the main ideological foundation of this Indian National Congress was gradual reforms rather than abrupt revolutions. So they want to keep aside the revolutions, and they want reforms as well, but in a constitutional they had faith in the capacity for self-correction, but in more and more less violent constitutional methods such as drafting petitions, memoranda, and formal appeal were central to this strategy. As I said earlier, the instrument to raise the voice of the Indian National Congress elites were formal appeals and other memoranda such as petitions, and so they want to question the British government in a more and more constitutional methods and a ahimsa method, non-violence method, of course. So coming to the next phase, then the extremists, or we can call it as a radical phase, which we can say that incarnated in the year 1905 through the event of partition of Bengal. So after the partition of Bengal, the nationalists felt there should be a more radical way, more a radical nationalist way against the British rule. They don't want a constitutional or a less violence method against the British rule. They want to overthrow the British officials or British colonial government as soon as possible. So they adopted a radical method through which there was an ideology of called as Swaraj, or we can in India, in English it is known as a self-rule method, which challenged the British authority in India. So the ideological shift also embraced cultural revival, emphasizing India's ancient heritage, traditions, and values as a source and strength and pride against the colonial subjugations. In the previous slides, I have already mentioned that, of the Mughal rule, there were many regional superpower, regional heavyweights, right, such as Marathas and the Mysore empires, right. So they, what in the radical phase, the leaders of the radical phase want to overthrow the British Empire by embracing the cultural revival such happened back in the Marathas and Mysore Empire. So they want to adapt, to want to glorify such empires as a notion supporting the Swaraj system, self-rule system. So you want to articulate about that empires to revive the cultural and the ancient heritage of Indian traditions to voice against the British Empire. So this period mark the transition from seeking incremental changes within the British framework to demanding complete self-governance, setting the stage of direct mass mobilization. So before the radical phase, as I said earlier, the main notion of the moderate phase was to want a change on the British framework and the British governance. But after the extremists came into the scene, so what they want a complete self-governance and overthrow the British as soon as possible. That was the difference between the Swaraj and the extremist phase. Swaraj and the moderate phase. So the most important rulers, the most important leaders of the extremist phase, what they did, the main propaganda they made was the Swadeshi movement, which encouraged the indigenous industries and to boycott the products of the Western products. They want to boycott the Western products and want to support the indigenous products or schools and other forums as well. The immediate response of the partition Bengal. What was immediate response of the partition of Bengal was the Swadeshi strategy, as I said earlier. So there was a national-wide public rallies to support Indian products and to boycott the British product. There was a mutiny in Belur in Tamil Nadu, current day Tamil Nadu, in which the British product were mobilized, set fire and destroyed because they want to overthrow the British by spreading a self-aware notion among the local peasants because which we can understand through the boycotting of the British goods. So they want the localist commoners to participate in the British movement, participate against the anti-British movements, participate in the national movements by just spreading public rallies throughout the Indian subcontinent. They want the local artisans or peasants to participate in it. So they cannot go and spread the nationalist ideologies through mere speeches. So what they did was they took the boycott movements and want to proclaim the national movements within the peasants and gather more strength among them. So that was the main strategy against the British rule. These movements had a lasting impact on the collective mindset, revoking the idea of economic independence. So they want the main notion was that Indians cannot challenge the British superpower against in military. British military was so scientifically established and well versed across the world, across the globe. So what they did was they don't want to challenge them in armed rebellion, but they want to weaken the British trade and through the boycott movements and want an economic independence among the Indians. So the main leaders of this moderate phase was Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Lala Rajpat Rai, and Bipin Chandra Pal. The shift in leadership moved away from behind the scenes negotiation, from confrontation within British authority, thereby galvanizing larger sections of society. So the main shift from moderate phase to the extremist radical phase is that there was a great leadership shift. They want to cut off the behind the scene negotiation and want to directly question the British authorities, which created a great effect among the local or larger sections of the societies. Leadership of Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Lala Lajpat Roy, what it did was their moderate phase was handled. The nationalist notion of the moderate phase happened between the elites of the society, but when coming to the radical phase, the common populace of great common population was also involved in this process, through which because of the leadership because of the leaders of the radical phase such as the Balagangadhar wanted them to participate. It can be reflected to speeches and public demonstration, which helped the common populace to get into the action and want Swaraj and national movements too. So later on, the modern phase slowly diluted when the Gandhian phase started to evolve. In the 1915, so Gandhi started to actively participate in the Indian national movement too from the year 1915, which ultimately resulted to the Indian independence in the year 1947. The intermediary phase is known as the Gandhian phase. So the main ideology of Gandhi, what he believed was ahimsa and non-violence. So the Gandhi believed in ahimsa, non-violence, and also he believed in the notion of satya, which is the truth. Gandhi developed the concept of satyagraha, which can be termed as a name true force, which can be emphasized on non-violent resistance could compel challenge by appealing a moral conscience of oppressor. So the notion that Gandhi adopted was he adopted satyagraha, through which the oppressor can be questioned not in a violent basis but on non-violent resistance. You want to question the oppressor in a non-violent way, which he believed in his conscience believed that the satyagraha will question the moral conscience of the oppressor as well. He championed the idea of self-sufficiency, encouraging the use of indigenous goods. The Swaraj movements of the radical phase. There was, as I mentioned earlier, in the Swaraj phase, the radicalists want to support, to encourage the indigenous goods of the Indian traders, right? So what Gandhi did was he to encourage the indigenous products, Swadeshi products, and to revive the local industries and to create an economic independence within the Indians and question the British involvement in Indian economy. His philosophy was deeply influenced by ancient Indian scriptures and moral teachings. So, by understanding Gandhi, we can also understand that Gandhi was more and more believer of God, and which can be reflected through his teachings. So what influenced Gandhi to move on such a belief was that he was inspired from Indian scriptures and moral teaching of the ancient India. So he kept himself apart from the Western thinkers and want himself to be reflected as one of the persons in par with other Ahimsa leaders such as Buddha or Jesus. Gandhi believed that political freedom must go in hand with social reform as well. So in his movement, through his movements, Gandhi wanted political freedom must not be within the hands of the politicians, but he want other sections of people such as the women and other local peasants and traders to get involved in the Indian national movement as far as possible. You want the greater sections such as the women to participate in the Indian freedom fights. So the landmark campaigns of the Gandhi, which are the non-cooperation movement from 1920 to 1922. The non-cooperation movement was the most crucial movement in Indian national movement too, which happened because of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre and other oppressive measures, through which Gandhi want to spread an awareness against the British goods. We want to pressurize the British by claiming an absolute economic independence, and we want to boycott British goods and wanted to establish education institution by the Indians as well to counteract the British influence in them. So the next one was Champaran Satyagraha, Salt Satyagraha of 1917 and 1930 respectively. So Salt Satyagraha connected with the Dandi March was also an infamous march of Gandhi, which he protested rebelled against many taxations, importantly the taxation in salts. So the most powerful one was the Quit India movement in 1942, It was nothing but an immediate call for independence, and which resulted in a mass protest across the Indian subcontinent as well. So coming to another topic, on the last topic of this presentation, which is the roundtable conference, nothing but a formal meeting where representative of India. So after these prolonged agitations among the Indians, the British government came along and also want to negotiate between the Indians. So what should be the future of this British colonial India? So they organized a roundtable conference, which is a formal meeting between the representatives of various sections, not only politicians or not only prominent leaders. They want all the leaders, leaders of various sections to participate in such a meeting. So these conferences are characterized by broad participation, as I mentioned earlier. So there were total of 3 roundtable conferences which happened. So among these 3 roundtable conferences, there were many aspirations and mixed outcomes as well within them. So the important aspects and decisions covers in the roundtable conference. So what are the decisions which covered in the roundtable conference? So there was extensive discussions were held on the optimal constitutional structure for India, particularly how to balance a strong central governance and provincial autonomy. So what they did was, the main thing they argued was to create a constitutional framework within India, in which there should be a strong central government and a provincial autonomy should also be granted. So they want to discuss on a legal document, on a constitutional document to govern the administrative India in the current political situation. Key focus was on safeguarding the political rights of minorities. So as India, there were many ethnic and religious minorities and communities presented, and the Britishers actually want to guide and focus on the safeguard of such community against exploitations by other ethnic or even the government as well. So they want to establish the semi-autonomous region, which is the provincial. They talked about the provincial and the princely states autonomy in the matters of taxation and other matters such as trade relations as well. So they want to create a legal framework for such autonomy granted. So these are the most important aspects in the roundtable conference. This was the most important aspects covered in the roundtable conferences. The representation in the roundtable conference. It's in the roundtable conferences. So the main representations were Jawaharlal Nehru, who represented Indian National Congress. Maulana Abul Kalam Azad is also a senior leader from the Indian National Congress, but also represented himself as a representative of many cultural dimensions across the national movement. So next most important one is Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who is also known as the father of independent Pakistan. He represents the All India Muslim League, and then comes Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, who was later appointed as the head of the leader of the drafting committee in the Constitutional Assembly as well. He represented himself as the leader of the depressed classes, and the Maharaja of Patiala, he represented himself the princely states, which was local autonomy bodies in the British colonial India. So this was the important representation. I think presentation comes to an end from this. So thank you. I think we can meet in the next class. Thank you.